On behalf of the InFocus team, I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening for the panel discussion on improving the lives of breast cancer patients. I am Janet Oles, Library Director at Moravian University and a liaison to InFocus, working with co-directors Drs. Belinda Waller-Patterson and Kimberly Peterson. I would also like to acknowledge InFocus Executive Director Kelly Denton-Borhaug and team members Christopher Hasse, who is monitoring the Q&A, Sarah Kuroda, and our student technician Emma Bachrath. I would like to thank the InFocus co-sponsors of the panel, the AAUW University Chapter, the Biology Department, Reeves Library, Friends of Reeves Library, and the Triota Honor Society. InFocus has 4 rotating themes, and this year's theme is Health and Justice, where we explore the larger question of what are the causes and consequences of health injustice. Tonight, we will hear from 3 women at 3 different organizations formed over the last 10 years who strive to improve the lives of all women of all races and ethnicities who are faced with breast cancer. The women on our panel will each speak about their work and then have a conversation about our topic. Questions from participants may be sent to the Q&A section of Zoom. Our co-moderators will ask the panelists questions that are within the scope of the panel topic, health justice. Panel members are not able to give medical advice nor answer therapeutic questions. This webinar is being recorded and a live transcription is at the top left of your screen. And now, Vice Provost Carol Trotman-Carr will introduce the co-moderators and panelists.
Thank you, Janet. Good evening, and thank you so much to all of you who are joining us this evening for our last breast cancer-focused event here in Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I'm so pleased to be a part of this evening's event, even if all I'm doing really is introducing the experts here. Let me begin by introducing our 2 facilitators who are both here on our faculty at Moravian University and are involved in cancer research and advocacy. First, we have Dr. Anne Marie Potter, the director of our occupational therapy program. Dr. Potter came to Moravian from Elizabethtown College a few years ago to help launch this program. Dr. Potter's research explores the impact of cancer on cognition and occupational performance. Her work has been presented at the European Society of Oncology Breast Cancer and Young Women International Conference. She's been working in the following clinical settings: in inpatient spinal cord injury, outpatient, home health, skilled nursing, and acute care. When she was 38 years old, Dr. Potter herself was diagnosed with breast cancer. Now a longtime survivor, she serves as a legacy advocate with the Young Survival Coalition and a consumer advocate representative on grant review panels for the Department of Defense Congressionally Directed Breast Cancer Research Program. Welcome, Dr. Potter. Dr. Anastasia Tevena is a professor in our Department of Biological Sciences. After earning her bachelor's degree in biomedical science from Lynchburg College, she went on to graduate school at the University of Delaware, from which she earned a PhD in chemistry and biochemistry. And her research focuses on cancer biology. In particular, she's interested in the gap junctions between neighboring cells and how deficiencies or mutations in these areas contribute to the development of cancer. She regularly teaches a course on cancer biology here at Moravian. In working with first-year students, she and her colleague Kristen Baxter from the art department have had students write children's books about science to introduce students at a very young age to the joys of science and scientific concepts. So welcome, Dr. Tevena. And now for our panelists. All 3 represent different aspects in supporting cancer patients and their families through their cancer journey. And as we know, our InFocus theme deals with health and healthcare, and this year in particular, how that ties into issues of social justice. Dr. Dina Rooney. Dr. Rooney is a retired hematologist oncologist in the Canton, Ohio area. She earned her medical degree from, as they say, the Ohio State University Medical School and did her residency in internal medicine at the University of Vermont. Her retirement dream was to create a cancer wellness center to provide free services to patients in the Canton area. Dr. Dina wants to give back to the community that embraced that local kid who came back home to practice medicine and taught her so many valuable lessons about courage and dignity over the years. She's on the board of Aunt Susie's Cancer Wellness Center for Women. Jean Patten-Coble. Jeanine is a graduate of St. Louis University and was a high school history teacher and a professional educational trainer for 15 years before she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2009. Jeanine is thrilled to have a wonderful husband, Terry, and her son, Jake, who carried her through her own cancer journey with strength, support, and love. Her own battle with breast cancer inspired the creation of the Little Pink Houses of Hope. There are now 20 retreat locations for cancer patients and their families in 10 states. Jeanine's amazed at all the wonderful people she's met through her mission, through her service, and thankful that God showed up in her life in such a powerful way to put her on this mission. She currently resides in Burlington, North Carolina with her family. And last but certainly not least, Terry Arnold. Terry was named one of Houston's 50 most influential women in 2017. She established in 1997 the Laura Center for Missing Children. In the mid-2000s, after months of visiting different doctors who told her there was nothing wrong with her, one doctor told her that she had triple negative inflammatory breast cancer and that in all likelihood, it was too late to do anything. Well, she's still here today, so apparently that wasn't true. She founded and serves as president of the Inflammatory Breast Cancer Network Foundation, which raises awareness of this particular cancer, as well as money for research. Although IBC accounts for only between 1% and 5% of all breast cancer diagnoses, it is among the most deadly and most aggressive breast cancers that exist. In fact, the largest percentage of deaths from breast cancer are due to inflammatory breast cancer. And so welcome, Dr. Dina, Jeanine, and Terry. Thank you for joining us this evening at Moravian University.
Thank you for having us.
Thrilled to be here.
Dr. Dina, I believe you are first to go for us.
All right. Well, I would like to thank you all for inviting me to participate and thank all of you that have joined us to listen to what we have to say. Just to give some perspective, I graduated from medical school in 1989 and then started my oncology fellowship in 1994. So I came into the oncology world in a different generation than Audre Lorde, and I think a lot of you were asked to read that book about her cancer journey. And I'm happy to say that the medical management of breast cancer has made many advances since 1978. Mastectomies are still part of that care for some women, but most women are able to get lumpectomies and preserve their breast. So we see less maybe controversy or issues about reconstruction and prostheses. The incidence of breast cancer has decreased somewhat, and we attribute this primarily to less use of hormonal therapy for postmenopausal women, and I hope in the whole country, less use of antibiotics and hormones in animal feed for exposure to estrogen in particular. As an oncologist, it was nice to see over my career, the survival from breast cancer increased both due to earlier diagnostic with improved radiation or radiology techniques and better and often less toxic therapies than I had available in the 90s when I started. I think the social issues and health injustice issues in the cancer arena have evolved less in the decades that I have been involved than the actual medical care. Women have some particular challenges. I am happy to say that in the oncology field itself, now about half of practitioners are actually women. When I started, that was about 10 or 12%. But in the surgical arena, it's still very male dominant, and there is a social disconnect there. Surgeons are often the first person a woman sits down with to talk about their breast cancer diagnosis. And the surgeons that don't recognize the social disconnect are less effective in their ability to communicate and provide personalized care to their patients. And that being said, there are a lot of good male breast surgeons out there, but a lot of surgeons are general surgeons, and there's a much different experience for the patient when they see those physicians. Other stressors that women face, women are now part of the workforce out of necessity. Their financial input to families is usually very important. And sometimes even they carry the insurance for the family. So working through therapy is an issue. And women are caregivers, and they not only caregiver for their children and their domestic partners, but they're often caregivers for extended family and even their in-laws. And women tend to put themselves first when they prioritize what gets done first, and hence can often neglect their own health and needs during this time. And I'll just add that single mothers and elderly women who now, at least in my area, are often raising grandchildren because of drug abuse and opioid related deaths, face a much higher challenge in getting through and navigating the system of healthcare with a cancer diagnosis. I personally have less experience with racial issues. I'm from a small city in Canton. It's racially diverse, but certainly not like Chicago, Cleveland, or even Columbus in Ohio. In Black women, we see a decreased survival rate with breast cancer that is related in all likelihood to diagnosis at more advanced stage of more aggressive cancers. And much of the outcome difference, I think, is economic in terms of access to care, buy-in to mammography. There is a significant decrease in percentage of women in minority populations, particularly the Black population and Latin population in our area. We did about 10 years ago start an angel program at our hospital where ladies in our communities go out and go to churches and other social groups and try to promote use of mammograms. And we actually have put mobile mammography in a lot of communities where they don't have access to a health center. There's also a big cultural disconnect in the medical system with, I think, Indigenous and Black people both. Some of this is based on historic distrust from experiments that were done and called research on patients that were unaware they were on a clinical trial. And it wasn't cancer-related research, but it's created a distrust for some populations. And then people have different religious and cultural beliefs and norms that don't necessarily mesh with modern traditional medical systems. One of my I can't believe it's a couple years ago was I was at a meeting and we had a presentation from ladies at our hospital that provide sleep sacks to all the infants. And they play a video and they have Spanish videos. We have a large non-English speaking Latin population. And they tell these ladies that they have to have a special bed, a special set of sheets, and then they swaddle their infant and they put them in this special little bed. And they're talking to Latin women that may have 8 children or may have 3 families living in the same home. And oftentimes a drawer with a blanket is their special bed for their infant. And they shut down. They don't even hear the rest and understand the rest because we're not respecting where they're coming from. I think obviously economics are obvious. In terms of access to care. It can be rural versus urban or just transportation challenges. In my community, we have no gastroenterologists that accept Medicaid. The closest you can go for a colonoscopy is an hour and a half from here. And we have probably 10 GI practices closer than that. And then just the expense of childcare, the supportive care, and your nutritional needs during chemotherapy provide economic challenges. And if you don't start your cancer journey poor, there's a good chance you're going to become poor. The average debt at the end of the first year of treatment for cancer is $10,000. That is related to deductibles, copays, uncovered drugs, supportive care medicines, or they're not considered medicines, drugs to help mouth sores, nutritional supplements, that kind of thing is not covered by insurance. So what we do see is that the bankruptcy rate in cancer patients is about 3 times that of the normal population. And in patients under 65, it's up to 5 times, or 20% of young people go bankrupt because they're not in a financial position to pay for their care. So at Susies Cancer, we're Wellness Center came into being in 2014. Our founder and executive director is named Marlene Mason. Her best friend died of ovarian cancer in 2011, and Marlene and her husband recognized what a challenge day-to-day life was during a cancer journey, and what unmet needs they had, much less people that might be in a more financially compromised position. We are still an all-volunteer organization. There are 3 of us that work in the office. All of our services are provided free of charge to anyone in our county with a cancer diagnosis that is confirmed. We do limit our period of help to when they are in active therapy. We get most of our funding through small grants, and we have a pasta dinner every year with silent auction. And for the last 2 years, we've actually just sent out fundraising letters and done okay. We use a very small portion of money for some marketing just to get the word out about us. We provide transportation to doctor's appointments, x-rays, lab appointments, chemo, and even daily radiation. We currently have 18 volunteer drivers, and we hire out an ambulance company if they need a wheelchair and or other transport services if we can't cover their rides with our volunteers. We provide food assistance, either in the form of Meals on Wheels or grocery cards for $50 a month to a local grocery store. We provide dignity tops. We have about 30 women around Ohio that sew scrub tops. They sew Velcro into the arms and down the front for ladies to wear to radiation. They also make hats and masks for patients that we take out to the hospitals and doctors' offices. School groups make blankets for our patients. We offer house cleaning once a month, up to 3 hours for patients. We have a program where we partnered with a local pharmacy and for non-pharmaceutical things. So Boost, Ensure, diapers, all kinds of wound care supplies, etc. They give us a significant discount, and then they actually deliver those to the patient's door. And this year we were able to add provision of free wigs. We had a lot of donated wigs that we didn't have a way to get out, and the hospitals during COVID quit disseminating any of their donated wigs. So we got all of the hospitals wigs, and we were able to partner with 2 wig shops who also donate their overstock, and our clients, we give them a voucher, they go to the wig shop, they're treated just like a regular client, get fitted, get the wig styled, and go home with it. We have a salon that does haircuts for half price, which we cover, and they can also get their heads shaved there. We are hoping to add a partnership with a dry cleaner and laundry to try to provide laundry services with pickup and drop off, because I have some physical issues. I've had a couple back surgeries, and laundry has been one of the bigger challenges in my life for the last 5 years. And our hope is to expand in the next year into a facility with some visibility. Right now, we just have office space and storage, so we can add some on-site services, legal advice like wills, insurance, investigating insurances, pre-planning funerals and burial expenses, nutritional counseling. We want to add support groups and art and music therapy and some complementary services. We have a model in Akron called Stewart's Caring Place. They've been around for about 15 years, and they just moved into a 12,000 square foot facility, and they're able to provide all of those services and more to about 6 different counties, and they do it with 8 paid employees. So that's where the dream is going. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dina, for that background and for that information about the agency that you've been working with, and thank you so much for providing those services to your local area. I know how very, very important those are. Next, we're going to hear from Jeanine.
So, hi, thank you so much, Carol, and thank you to all of the people virtually watching tonight. I think it goes without saying that all of the reasons Dr. Rooney just laid out about the life of a breast cancer patient is exactly why our organization exists. So I am the founder and executive director of Little Pink Houses of Hope. Free week-long patients their families. As said in the introduction, I was diagnosed when I was 39 years old, and it was crystal clear to me as a patient walking this journey every day that it wasn't just me that was diagnosed. It was my entire family who was diagnosed. My husband, my son, they took on new roles. My husband all of a sudden was in charge of carpool and lunches and things he hadn't necessarily been doing previous to that. My son was faced with a mother who, not only was she bald and all of those sorts of changes, but she didn't have energy. There was a very good possibility that I might not make it. And because of all those factors, it is just such a stressor on families, just plain and simply a stressor on families. And Dina, you did a beautiful job laying out all of the aspects to which those stressors manifest themselves in the lives of patients. So when we looked at our organization, one of the things we looked at is this notion called organic environments of support. So there are a lot of clinical environments of support that are great and they exist. There are therapies, there's different things that people can go to in a clinical setting. We are huge fans of all of those things. We also realize that the hospital or the clinic setting for a lot of family members is a very scary place. It's where the toxic drugs go into the body. It's the thing that, makes mom feel bad. And when you're a caregiver, oftentimes your role has changed so much that you don't even really have time to add an additional thing into yourself. Kind of like Dina was saying that women have a tendency to prioritize everybody else first. Caregivers do exactly the same thing when they are thrown into that role. They prioritize the patient over everything else, including their own mental health and including their own supports that they oftentimes need. So we created Little Pink, and to give you a nutshell, and I'm going to tell you a story because I'm just coming off of a retreat. We do 20 retreats this year. We're going to do 22 next year, 22 different weeks. And we've managed over the past 11 years to serve thousands of breast cancer families with our retreats and our retreat model. And I'm coming off a retreat in the Central Coast of California last week. And we sat and we have programming throughout the week that is designed to support each member of the family. So we have family communal activities, we have empowering activities for the breast cancer patient. And one of the events that we have every week is kind of a survivor sharing time, a survivor coffee. And as I sat in this room last week with 11 women aged 25 through 37, the unyielding sentiment from these women was how they had to advocate and fight just to get a test, just to get diagnosed. They knew something was wrong. And, I'm just going to make an assumption that there's a lot of younger women watching this evening as part of Moravian's campus and, beyond that. But I cannot say enough about how this self-advocacy is part of this health justice. So if you are young, there is some inert kind of unconsciousness that exists that you're too young to be diagnosed. You're too young to have breast cancer. And that still exists, which freaks me out sometimes, that there are doctors who have a woman sitting in front of them and still feel as if they can say that to a woman, and a young woman at that. So that was the pervasive notion in this conversation last week. And I can tell you that after doing this for 11 years, that has been a pervasive conversation since I started this organization, is that as women, we have to fight for our care. And when I look at the number of young women who are diagnosed and the average age now for our organization of families attending is 39 years old. So it is not, a large number of elderly women attending. We have a lot of young women who are moms with all the challenges Dina was talking about that they're afflicted with. The other thing that I think that we've seen over the past 11 years, when I look again at kind of that self-advocacy or that place of equity, and I'll talk about African Americans in a minute, but I think that oftentimes that's the place we can go. So I want to bring bit of light on them as well. We've seen a tremendous number of men who have been diagnosed with breast cancer who feel totally and completely ostracized within this breast cancer community. And the number is small, don't get me wrong. The number of men who are diagnosed compared to the number of women, it is a much smaller number. But no one should ever feel ostracized within a larger diagnostic community. We have, as an organization, we have African American women that about year 2, year 3, we made a conscious decision that we had to look as an organization at what our equitable practices were. What percentage of women have breast cancer that are African American, that are Asian, and what do our numbers look like? So what does our acceptance rate look like? Is there some unconscious bias with our acceptance committee or our assignment team? And really kind of digging in with that. And I think that's work that a lot of organizations can do, but it's a decision that you have to make to do. And one of the outcomes for that, because anytime you're looking at any injustice, oftentimes you're looking at how to fix those. We had to look at where we were spending some money in terms of maybe conferences we were attending. You know, we're attending conferences that are predominantly white. Let's go ahead and throw some of our money and some of our resources into some conference participation for, you know, a more African American community. In one instance, we looked at the Chinese community and the Hispanic community to see what their needs were, and looking at getting documentation in their languages to be able to have them have more accessibility. We also have had to look at the equitable distribution of our volunteer core and our volunteer base to be able to cover some accessibility needs of patients. So we line up, the services that we need when we have a family who might be deaf, or have a couple of participants in their family who might be deaf, so that throughout the entire week, we have all of those services lined up at every function that we have, so that the parent doesn't have to be the person who takes on all of that responsibility of signing throughout the week. They still get to be on vacation just like everybody else. So I think we're looking at it from a very holistic standpoint. But much like Dina described, I think the big thing that we see is that, you know, higher levels of discrimination are associated with elevated risks of comorbidities and cancers. And I don't think as a society, we can sit back and ignore that any longer. They go hand in hand. And a lot of the work we're doing as an organization is about looking at how we can support individuals, not only in our retreat model, but then how do we support them afterwards and going forwards. And out of that, we directly started a Children of Hope scholarship, which is designed to help bridge that gap for a lot of families. The scholarship is one that is for patients who've been on our retreats. Their children apply for it to be able to help with their college expenses. And we have found that to be an interesting additional piece of our puzzle. And then this past year with COVID, we also added virtual retreats. We continue to do in-person retreats. We've never stopped, even during COVID. We altered our model slightly, very slightly, but we continue to offer retreats. But we added virtual retreats because just, you know, the incidence of COVID and some people who, you know, were not interested in traveling, or, you know, needed to quarantine, or whatever the case may be. So trying to address those issues as well. And we really just see our space right now in this conversation as one where we've taken some progressive steps. We're learning, we're growing, and we just want to be a part of the conversation, because it's not okay that as a white woman, I can survive breast cancer, and just from the sheer fact of health injustice, that a Black woman might not survive. It's just not okay in our society anymore. And so anyway, we put just this great big hug and embrace around families as they're going through their breast cancer journey. And I think an important piece of this puzzle, and I'm sure we'll get to it later, is just the need for collaboration across organizations and industries to be able to help support those efforts, both in the nonprofit space, the academia space, and the charitable business space. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be on a panel with such amazing women. And thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Jeanine, and thank you for what you're doing. I read some of those essays from those scholarship winners on your website, and they are incredibly powerful. And I invite everyone to go out there and read them. They are really incredible stories from these students whose parents have gone through this cancer journey, and not all survived. But the impact that had on their lives, really incredible. And then both Dina and Jeanine, thank you for talking about the supports that are needed. And in particular, you talked about some of the issues. Jeanine, you were talking about how scary the hospital can be. Well, I got to tell you, as someone who's been going through cancer treatment during COVID, and I'm totally okay, I have a great support network, that infusion space is a super scary space for a lot of people, because you cannot bring a guest in with you. You are in there on your own because of COVID protocols with the nursing staff, and they are as wonderful as they can be, but they're not your friends, they're not your family. And so it's a really, really scary space for a lot of people. And so the support in these really challenging times is really important. So thank you for what you've been doing. Terry, you're up.
Okay, well, it's been interesting. I'm taking notes as we're going along. There's so much to talk about. And since part of this is about injustice, I'm just going to piggyback on something that Jeanine just said. Anytime there's injustice, there's a byproduct that happens, whether it's just dramatic as what I'm about to say, or maybe something seems more subtle. Injustice equals death every time. The lack of care could equal death. The lack of being able to go to college could equal a death of future. Injustice equals some permanent damage. And so I think it's really interesting to see, this topic about injustice, because I too was diagnosed with breast cancer. I was 49 years old. And it's interesting what Jeanine said about young, and everything that Dr. Rooney, I wrote a lot of things that you said, because it all resonates with my experience very much too. And my experience echoes other people. So I talk about my experience, not because it happened to me, because it does echo women who aren't always here to have that voice. But at 49, I woke up, one breast was larger, it was red, hot, and swollen. I went to the doctor, he made fun of me, made a joke. And I'm like, no, this isn't funny, something's wrong. And I felt like if it had been my nose, they would have run tests, but there was something about it being my boob, made it funny. And I had to fight very hard for diagnosis. I was not overweight, I had nursed 5 babies, I have no family history. And I was 49 years old. They said, you can't possibly have cancer, you're too young. Well, after 4 months, I went from, there's nothing wrong with you, do you need some happy pills, you're a little overly concerned, to, oh, by the way, oops, we missed it, with nothing in between. And I was given a very short time to live. And as I think one lady said, spoiler alert, I didn't die, but it was 13 years ago. But it was shocking to me. And my background's injustice things. I founded a missing center for children that became huge. I wrote the first rape crisis manual for the Youth Area Women's Center. I've done a lot of things in my life. And I never would have thought my interest in justice would relay into cancer. But I've met women, and kind of like that fried green tomatoes thing. I'm a little bit older and have more insurance. I was able to keep going back to the doctor and going back and paying all those copays and seeing all these people and getting out of work and arranging for my child care, but it still wasn't easy. And I was trying to think, what would it be like for someone who's younger, who maybe was a little more timid or had less resources or less insurance? Well, I found out what happened. I met women along the way when I heard from their families that they died. In the 4 months it took me to get my diagnosis, some of them didn't make it. The youngest IBC patient I met was 19, and her doctor told her in Pearl, Mississippi, she couldn't possibly have cancer, that 19-year-old virgins didn't get cancer. Now, the virgin part really threw me, but babies get cancer. There is no age limit. And I see cancer, women are getting cancer younger and younger. Even when I went to MD Anderson, and they were great to me, and they weren't the ones who misdiagnosed me, by the way. When I'd walk in, they'd often say, who are you here to support? Because I was by myself. I'm here to support me. I didn't bring people with me. That's just not how I roll. and they thought I was there to support somebody else. Women are getting cancer younger and younger. I love it that you bring up men, because men walk into these pink, fluffy mammogram rooms with little teddy bears and lace. Can we please stop that? You know, these poor men. I met one man who said when he had his mastectomy, he asked about reconstruction. He was made fun of. He said, no, I've got this huge hollow in my shirt. And when I'm in business meetings, if I'm not wearing a jacket, it's pretty obvious. And it's a distraction. They said they never had a man ask for reconstruction. There's a lot of things we can do better. And I've heard y'all address things about women of color. And I think that's a good conversation. But I'm shocked still at the stigma I see about cancer. And I understand some of the distrust, especially in some of the Southern communities. And I'm a Southern, by the way, just FYI. But I see of the women in the brown communities that are Indian, and the shame factor that it's significant. And so what happened with me, someone had done a news story on me about inflammatory breast cancer because of what I was known for in my community. And when that happened, women started contacting me. So I started a support group at first. This was in 2007. And by the way, inflammatory breast cancer, which makes up the single largest component of death of breast cancers, which also isn't found with a mammogram or biopsies or ultrasounds, by the way, it's a whole nother thing, makes up the largest single proportion of death, was not listed in Susan G. Komen's website, American Cancer website. It was just off the radar. This disease has been written about for a couple of thousand years. There's actually statues written, done up from Michelangelo showing what inflammatory looks like. So it's not a new disease, but it's labeled as orphan. So I had this crazy rare cancer. Women were finding me. I started putting together support groups to try to help educate, because there was not a lot written. But in time, just like Jeanine was talking about being so touched by these women, I started meeting these women, and I was going to their houses and holding their babies. I started going to their funerals. And one day I was cracking up. I literally had gone to 6 funerals in 4 weeks, which meant I went more than one in one day in Houston, Texas. And not one of the women were over 40. I couldn't take it. And I had been trying to figure out how to do something more impactful. And I saw lots of cool things were being done. But what happened was, about that time, a researcher sent me his paper. And he'd met me at a conference. He said, I know you care about inflammatory. I want to fund this research. I can't get any money. He got a good score, but because inflammatory is rare, and I get it, they won't give me the money. They put the money where they think they can get a bigger bang for their buck. And then I started digging into research. I found out that late stage cancer research doesn't get very much money. I found out male breast cancer gets about like 8 grants in 20 years. Inflammatory, in over 20 years, it got less than 150. I found out most organizations only give 2% of their budget to research. And I felt like, oh, I found my niche. I can make some justice by raising money. But I also found we were in a bit of a pink, weary world. We talked about breast cancer so long, people make a lot of assumptions about what happens to the money. And education is important, prevention is important, awareness is important. But where for me, where the rubber hit the road was funding research. And so I filed that 501c3 after basically crashing into Wendy Woodward's office one day and saying, give me something to do, I'm cracking up. And I don't know why I picked her. And I literally crashed. It was a moment. And she said, there's this little niggling question I have that needs like $30,000. I can't get it. Will you help me? And I said, sure. And I walked out of there thinking, oh my gosh, what have I done? I just promised a woman who helped save my life, I'll give her $30,000. I'm an ordinary person, a lot of cancer debt like most people do. But I thought, I've got 5 kids. I probably wasted $30,000 at Sonic. I am going to get her this money. And in 6 weeks, we had it, and we wrote her that check and handed it to her. And I knew it was on to something. So I started the IBC Network. We now have a sister charity following our model in Australia as well as the UK. And we were working on Canada, but because of COVID, we had to stand down. So hopefully Canada will come up soon. We're very lean. About 89 cents of every dollar we raise goes to research. And that is what we do. We run support groups. We do things to help in lots of other ways, but our main mission is actually funding research. And we spend a lot of time facilitating research conversations from different institutions. So I put the word network in our name. We realized these guys had no way to talk to each other. So we're really proud of some of the things that we see happening where they are collaborating more. But so that's kind of the skinny on the IBC network. I'm going to put some links in the chat that people might think are interesting. And it is a little more than a niche place people might think to get funding done. And I hope I can encourage people to find out ways to do really effective funding, or you can guide me on how to do better. Because I tell you what, under COVID and the so much financial burden that people feel globally in all kinds of different ways, research funding is going to be more and more challenging all the time, and the researchers are feeling it. And so hopefully we can do some good things there.
Amen to that, Terry. Dr. Tevenon, Dr. Potter, I believe you are going to facilitate our questions. So you are up.
Thank you very much to our three panelists. I've been frantically taking notes and listening to you intently. This is unbelievably amazing work, really important work. So if our audience members would like to start putting some questions in the Q&A, Christopher Hassey is gonna monitor the Q&A and pass the questions on to us. But in the meantime, I'm gonna ask a very general question, and I do know that Dr. Troutman-Carr has a question coming up, so we'll call on her in a minute. But I wanted to start off a bit more general, and each of you sort of briefly mentioned this difficulty of reaching individuals from different backgrounds and trying to reach vulnerable communities and making, you know, concerted efforts to try to diversify your companies, right, and really help more women. And you know, you mentioned lack of research, lack of funding for certain types of breast cancer that are prevalent in, for example, African American women, like the inflammatory cancer or triple negative breast cancer. And so I was wondering if you could please comment on how do your organizations reach individuals from different backgrounds, and you know, how can we continue helping these most vulnerable communities? And it can be, you know, any three of you, whoever would like to jump in.
I want to make sure I understand the question. When you say, how can we reach the most vulnerable, but you said research funding.
No, that was just an example. So for example, Dr. Rooney, you provide, your organization provides rides to individuals, right, who need to go to appointments. How do you even get people in vulnerable communities to realize that this is available to them? You know, they're busy dealing with families and taking care of their families and working, and how do you get them?
Well, what we have done primarily, and like I said, we run on a really tight budget right now, but we basically we take our dignity tops to the oncology offices and all the radiation facilities. So every radiation patient is offered one in our community. Right now, we are called Aunt Susie's Cancer Center for Women. We've started taking some men, and we're in the process of changing our name and dropping for women. But we also take information out and do marketing, like we take bagels and coffee in the mornings to the oncology offices with our flyers. We actually have board members that are in administration in both of our local cancer centers, and we're trying to get board members from the 2 independent oncology offices as well, because we get so much information on what people need at the hospitals. And other than that, it's really word of mouth. And most of our patients are referred by either the oncology offices or the cancer navigators at our hospitals. We actually, I forgot to mention, we have a program called a companion program. We actually make monthly or bi-weekly phone calls to our clients just to check in on them. And we had set up something, we were to start doing that and making inpatient visits to people that were in for a long time. But in COVID, what we're working on now is just putting like not a greeting card and not a get well card, because that's not a nice thing to send to a cancer patient when they're in the position they're worried about dying. Get well doesn't sound very nice. But what we're going to start doing is providing our flyer and a card and a little gift to people in the hospital for cancer surgeries, so that we get access to more people in the community that have cancer. And I'm working on getting I have mostly elderly drivers. And so we have a couple of housing projects, and I also volunteer with other organizations where we help a couple of the grade schools in those communities with clothing and gifts and Christmas, all kinds of fun little things. But they have a presence in those communities, but I need to get some younger drivers because I have drivers that are afraid to go into that community right now. But the food assistance and the other things we are able to provide to those folks.
And Anastasia, let me just add that. So the Nurse Navigator program, the hospitals that have them and the clinics that have them, we try to work directly with nurse navigators because oftentimes they know their patients better than anybody else in terms of patients who are currently in treatment. Our organization, because we do these retreats all over the country, and we have men and women from all over the country attending our retreats from all aspects, rural, low socioeconomic, you name it, and they are part of our programming. What we find is that so many of the participants who attend our retreats are also looking for, how can I give back? How can I have purpose? That place where a lot of cancer patients find themselves after they've been going through treatment and they've been blessed with something that has meant something to their family. And so we also work to try to empower the people who come. We tell them up front, you owe us nothing. We're never going to ask a dime from you. Like, that's not who we are, what we do. But what we find is so many people are looking for purpose. So we try to help them see how they can get involved within their local community. And we have this from a lot of African-American women that attend. And one of the things we tell them is, sometimes what we offer feels like kind of a vacation fairy has given it out to them, but that's a fun thing for them to talk about, which also sometimes gets people to the table for other things or other things that they need to look at, whether that's medical, whether that's clinical, or whether that's just how can I be an advocate within my own community with a voice. And what we've seen is that sometimes they start out talking about Little Pink and they morph into an advocate within the African-American community for the issue of being diagnosed and all of those sorts of things. And we love that. We love that their passion might start with us, but then it finds its roots in what they really see as how they can help their community.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Anne-Marie, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So one of our participants has a question regarding the desensitization or normalization of breast cancer in our society. And to the point, and I'm going to kind of jump out and interpret this from my point of view, is that people think, oh, it's breast cancer. You have cancer, but you're going to live. And I think, for us on the panel, I know for me, it's very emotional listening to the three of you and listening to especially about African-American women, because I've had many friends I've met through my journey that are not with us. They've died from this disease. So how do we bring how do you see the conversation, or how can we bring the conversation to, breast cancer is a deadly disease, especially for individuals who are not in that typical expected population of the women who are in the mammogram recommendations of 40 and over.
I will say this, our organization very early on had a conversation because on our Facebook page, people said, you keep posting pictures of women who are dying and it's kind of a bummer on Facebook. And I said, well, guess what? Cancer is kind of a bummer in real life. And I said, we are going to keep putting the faces of women, real women, 24-year-olds, 30-year-old showing you their kids, we're telling you their stories. We're going to celebrate the joy and the hopefulness, but we're not going to ignore the fact that women are dying en masse in this cancer community. And it's true with triple negative, it's true with IBC, it's true with a lot of young women. And I think that is an important piece of the puzzle, because I agree. I think there's a desensitization about breast cancer. I think there's a desensitization as well with stage 4 patients, because they have hair. How can you be sick if you have hair? You don't really have the bad cancer, you have hair. Like, you know, the advent with what we've done in terms of drugs for cancer has, this is personal opinion, but I feel as if it has given us happier looking patients on the outside, or more socially acceptable looking patients on the outside. And that doesn't change the fact that they're dying on the inside. And, you know,
You are killing me here. What you're saying is so perfect. Keep going. I'm just like cheering you on.
Yeah, and you know, Terry, because we live in this space, so we see it all the time. The way that really stage 4 patients are, I'm going to use the term glossed over, because I feel as if it's a good, you know, you kind of put lipstick on. Lipstick is a gloss and it makes you look good, but it doesn't mean that, you know, anything's really changed. Your lips are still your lips underneath. But I think as a society, we try to gloss over stage 4 patients because we want them to look a certain way. We also don't want to look at somebody who's 30 years old, who has a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and think about them dying, because if that can happen to them, that can happen to me. And that's where it all breaks down and gets scary with the stereotypes.
And I know I was under a lot of pressure to be the chipper cancer patient. You know, you're on this side of the grass, it's good. And it's like, but, you know, I'm trying really hard not to die, because I was given very little hope at my diagnosis. But there is a lot of pressure. And I always appreciate sometimes women when you see them going to chemo and they're holding up their little sign, you know, day 3 chemo. And I don't want to take away what makes them feel strong, but partly I think we're under a lot of pressure to celebrate and be grateful and not share our fears and not reach out for the services we need that Dr. Rooney was talking about and offering and things like that. And so we deny ourselves a lot of things, but also because of my rape crisis background, I feel like there's a little bit of judgment that comes in too as women get more ill, or men, where I remember when I was doing rape crisis work, people say, well, what were you wearing? What were you doing? Why were you there? How many people have said, did you miss your mammogram? Well, a mammogram doesn't make you not have cancer. That's a test to see if you have cancer. Or they ask you, you know, well, did you drink a lot of Diet Coke, or did you this, or did you do that? And it reminds me a lot of those rape crisis days. What were you wearing? Where were you at? There's a judgment because we want to feel safe. I want to think I'm not going to do something that might put me in harm's way in all kinds of ways. So if I can figure out what you did put you in harm's way, then I'm safe. But that's not how cancer works, and cancer doesn't care. And your question, we know to get the desensitization, I think we are less afraid of something, but I tell people, and we got busted on for our logo was the silence is killing me. That no one's talking about inflammatory. And people say it's a very negative message, but it's really true. And I tell people all the time, if you don't think cancer is a serious issue, or breast cancer is a serious issue, open up any major city Sunday newspaper to the obituary column. Valiant fight, valiant fight, valiant fight. Breast cancer, breast cancer, breast cancer. And I mean, it's still real. And we need to talk about it in a really way, in a hopeful way. And that's why I got in research. And by the way, I want to give kudos to Jeanine. And I know a lot of IBCers who have gone to her Little Pink, and they just come back glowing and saying that it gave them some family bonding. Because again, injustice equals death. And when that injustice happens in the family, there's divorce, there's bankruptcy, the children are, you know, left on their own sometimes. And there's generational damage off that one diagnosis. And that's something I would love to see changed.
And as a physician, I think, you know, I found it really cool through the course of my career. When I started, nobody would go out in public without a wig. And over the years, I had so many patients that opted to wear the baseball cap, wear the knit cap, or just walk around bald. I had one girl that went out to like a costume shop and bought different colored wigs. Every time she came for chemo, she had a bright wig or a purple wig and just made it. But it's, to me, it was them empowering themselves. It's like, okay, I'm not a victim of this disease. I'm living with this disease, and here's how I'm going to express it. But I do agree now that, I mean, I had a patient that I treated for 7 years for metastatic breast cancer, never told her employer, managed to take the 3:30 appointment so she could get her chemo and just take off early. And they weren't aware until about a month before she passed that she had cancer, because she didn't want to be discriminated against at work or fired. I've had patients get fired when they get metastatic breast cancer. I've had them win lawsuits over that. So yeah, it's a lot of our therapies have gotten so less toxic that people go for, I mean, in people with Herceptin or HER2 positive breast cancer can live a decade with metastatic breast cancer. And I've had physicians say, oh no, there's no way you had liver mets 5 years ago. And then they go look at the x-rays and come back and like, oh, I looked at your x-rays. You really did have a 10-centimeter liver met. Yeah. So it's yeah, other doctors don't believe it happens. So how do we expect people in the community to get that people that look normal are still sick?
Carol, would you like to ask your question about gender issues? You had put that in the chat a while back, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask it.
Sure. And I appreciate, I think it was Terry who was talking a little bit about, well, several of you mentioned the fact that men can get breast cancer too. And it's a very small percentage of all breast cancers. It's something like 0.5% or less than 0.5%, but that is still funded better, Terry, you said, than IBC. But I'm wondering how much of, in the work that you all have done, and how much do you think of breast cancer awareness, research, treatment support is impacted by gender? Which is to say that even though both men and women can get breast cancer, it really is mostly considered a women's disease. And if it were equal men and women, or primarily a men's disease, do you think that we would be approaching it differently? That perhaps, well, very much of breast cancer is curable, especially if it's caught in the early stages, that we might be further along with the cure, and it might be just kind of viewed differently and treated differently. And I don't mean treatment medically, but I mean in terms of how we talk about it.
I have an example. I had class 4 lymphedema, so I had to have bypass surgery to get it fixed up. And unfortunately, I drained for forever and ever. Amen. I had drains for 17 weeks. They say I have a record at MD Anderson, but that's how much flu was in my body, so I'm not surprised. They kept taking the drains in and out. As they put in the drains, they kept getting bigger. And they said, we're going to use the ones we normally use for guys. That's okay, fine. So I go to buy all the stuff to take home with me, and they go, oh no, this is the guy version, and they gave it to me. I'm like, wait a minute. When I bought the girl versions of these drains, I had to pay for them. They go, we found the guys don't use them if they have to pay for them. We just give them to you. Made me crazy. No, I'm not trying to throw rocks at guys. I think guys get a bad rap about a lot of things. But I have found a lot of inequity in my name. It's a dead giveaway. Terry, Terry. I have learned when I go to an appointment and they think I'm a man, I get treated different than if I go somewhere and they think I'm a girl. And it happens all the time. And my name, it has been a blessing and a curse in some ways because it's a boy spelling. But I do think there is inequity. But I don't, like I said, I don't want to come out bashing on guys. I've met some great guys who really care. But I do think, just like my doctor made fun of me because it was my breast, if it had been my nose that was doubled in size, red hot and swollen, they'd have done some tests. He sent me home and told me not to be worried.
And there's a question in the chat that's very much related to Carol's question, and Kim asked it. Is there an impact or health disparity for people who are transgender? Have you come across that in your work?
I did have, I saw anybody who had breast cancer. And so I had several, I had a lot of lesbian patients. I had I never had a transgender breast cancer patient, probably because breast cancer is so rare in men. And although it's somewhat surprising, because you think that there would be a significant risk because of the estrogen supplementation that they're given. But I rather imagine that in a lot of offices and a lot of treatment settings, transgender and any LB, I can't say all those letters, but there is so little education in medical school, and it's getting better. But telling people that being gay is just normal and they can't change it doesn't change the bias of people that are raised in certain religious backgrounds or people that come from different countries. I mean, and quite frankly, I went to medical school with people who just were so averse to anything different than their norm, and they're out there practicing medicine, and you don't change their attitude. So I think people have to shop. I think people in those positions really have to shop for physicians. And depending on your community, you may or may find somebody that treats you like a person instead of like a spectacle. And that's very sad.
So, yeah, I think just that's a really rough area when we're talking about these individuals. But not only, I think one thing that I've recognized through going to the Young Survival Coalition conferences is trans of women transitioning to male, female to male, and breast cancer being discovered during their transition surgeries, which is, I just recently read a post on Instagram from a trans male, and to me, it was just like, I can't even imagine. This individual was African American, went in for the surgery and learned he now had breast cancer, a woman's disease. And, as much as men do get breast cancer, but as we know, and I think Terry brought it up, the teddy bears and the pink, and when you go to get a mammogram, they don't even have robes that fit men to go in, and those machines for mammograms are not made for men. So it's mind blowing to even try to even think about what individuals who are transgender go through with this diagnosis. But I just want to clarify, I think we're getting close to our end time. But I had one question, and I'm so impressed with this panel because to me, you've really addressed this continuum from research to what goes on to treatment to life outside of treatment. And, I think it would be just wonderful to share just one poignant or joyful or really satisfactory moment where your goal of making a difference really showed through somebody's experience or something that somebody told you through that. So I don't know if everyone, would mind sharing something just with us.
Sure, I'll jump in and go first. So I think I have probably a million of these types of stories being on all of our retreats. But we had one woman, her name was Sherry, and she was a mother. She had an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old son. And like I said, we do empowering activities. And one day we were doing paddleboarding, and I was next to her paddling out, and she was on her knees. She was scared. I mean, shaken like a leaf. She was scared. And I looked at her and I said, "You're great. You're on your knees. You don't have to get up." She's like, "I do." And so we worked on getting her up. She got up and she started paddling. And these two boys were standing on the shore. "Mom, you're a rock star." Like, they were just screaming at the top of their lungs about how great, how wonderful she was, her accomplishment. They were celebrating her. And we're out in the middle, not the middle of the bay, but we're out in the water. And she looked over me. This is how I need boys to remember me. They need to remember that no matter how bad I felt, I still tried. I still tried. And I think at the end of the day, as moms, that's kind of what we all want. We want to leave a legacy for our kids that leaves them in a great space. Unfortunately, for a lot of the kids, those moments can be few and far between. And oftentimes for those kids, they go through an agonizing journey of writing that last chapter together, especially when they're young. But that kind of moment, that moment of like, I can do it. Like, I'm not just a cancer patient. Like, everybody stop looking at me as cancer patient. I am a rock star woman.
Terry, do you have a moment to share with us?
Well, it was kind of hard to beat that, but I definitely understand that moment when you're cheering somebody on. And I think one of the things that was hard for me is being told I had 2 months to live at the get-go. And I was literally planning to give my body to science when I ended up at MD Anderson, and they said, we think we can help you. And when I talk about inflammatory, I sign everything I do with hope always, rather than sincerely, hope always, because I want people to have hope, and I want my story to give them hope, my wellness to give them hope. And I've had women who contacted me that said, no one gave me hope. And you gave me hope, and now I'm giving someone else hope. And I am giving them away, and it's a tough battle, I know, but to get through their lives like Jeanine's doing, keeping the family together, keeping things together, letting them be a whole person. And one thing that means a lot to me is I'm seeing people sign on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter all the time, hope always. And I see that growing and magnifying. And that means a lot to me, because when you don't have hope, you can't make anything better. And how to grow hope, how to cultivate hope is not an easy task. Personally, I think it comes out of developing gratitude. But sometimes you need someone to help you develop gratitude. Jeanine is helping develop gratitude. Dr. Rooney, when you clean someone's house, you are developing gratitude. We are adding hope. And I think that is just something that I want there to be a solid layer of that in someone's cancer journey.
And Dina, would you like to share with us?
Well, I'll say that I've worked at Aunt Susie's for just since February. And so we don't get a lot of direct interaction with our clients, but I'm just going to share a patient that will forever hold a special place in my heart. Her name was Carla, who it became crazy chemo Carla through the course of her therapy. She first had breast cancer and disappeared from my office 6 months after I treated her, and then came back when her sister got ovarian cancer. And when she was initially diagnosed, it was before BRCA testing. They were Jewish. She was BRCA2 positive. And when she went to surgery for her prophylactic oophorectomy, she had stage 3C ovarian cancer. She responded to everything I did. Everybody in Canton, Ohio that got ovarian cancer came to my office because they thought I could do for her what I did for her. But she was a unique individual. She belonged to support groups. She came to our office with any new chemo start, with anybody that she knew of that didn't have somebody to support them, and sat with them during their first chemo and came back for other chemos. We called her our mascot. She at one point had she was in horrible shape. She was admitted with a bowel obstruction. Typically people with stage 4 cancer, they don't do surgery for bowel obstruction because their prognosis is so poor. But I still had drugs she hadn't had, and she had still responded to everything else. And so I talked them into operating on her and started her on chemotherapy, and actually had her on the extended care facility floor inside our hospital because she lived on her own and had all kinds of dressing changes and things to take care of. And she was in the hospital over Passover, and she really wanted to go to Seder. And our Jewish radiation, I wrote her a pass to go to the gift shop and leave the floor. He met her at the front door of the hospital, took her to his home, and they shared Seder together. And we all thought it was the last time, and she actually lived 5 more years. But just that restored her hope, because it gave her not just part of her normal life, part of her faith and what kept her going. And it was probably one of the most memorable things I ever did. And we never got caught, but the hospital knew it happened, which was pretty cool.
Thank you so much for sharing these stories. This is wonderful. We're going to let Dr. Troutman-Carr to close out for us tonight. So I'll leave the floor to her.
And thank you to all of our panelists and to our facilitators tonight. Really appreciate you being here, especially at the end of Pink Month. I have to say, I've never been a fan of pink, and going through breast cancer treatment night right now, I'm not sure that I like it any more than before. Please, if you're able to, find a way to donate to charitable organizations that actually send money to cancer researchers or support, not just those that do a lot to support their boards and their officers, but to actually send the money to where it's needed. Be careful of those organizations where a lot of the money stays with the organization. And the organizations that presented tonight are three really good examples of where you can support, and they're not the only ones. And there are some here in our community, and there are some large organizations. Ladies, I will tell you, mammograms do save lives. My next door neighbor it's too dark now, but he is a doctor. He is not he does not do cancer, but he does not believe that that mammogram saves lives. That's what his wife told me when she was asking about why I had lost my hair. And I said, I'm telling you as a fact, mammograms save lives. As Terry has said, mammograms aren't going to diagnose everything. They're not going to help you with IBC, but mammograms are going to help with a lot. And so please don't skip them. Young women who might be listening to this, as soon as you're eligible to get them. If you have a family history, get them before. Don't skip them. Even during a pandemic, don't skip them. And don't forget our Play for K event with women's basketball in February. I think Moravian women's basketball, I think for 7 or 8 years in a row, has been the #1 Division III women's basketball team in that Play for K challenge, raising tens of thousands of dollars for breast cancer research through the K Yao Foundation. So thanks to them. I really want to acknowledge our in addition to our InFocus panel, our panelists today, and our co-directors, Dr. Belinda Waller-Peterson and Dr. Kimberly Winarchik, and then Dr. Potter, Dr. Tevenau, who facilitated. I want to also acknowledge our InFocus director, Dr. Kelly Denton-Borhog, Chris Hassey here, who was monitoring the Q&A, and Sarah Carota, who assists with keeping everything organized. I want to thank the InFocus co-sponsors of this panel, as Janet had said at the beginning. And just let you all know that when the survey concludes, when the webinar concludes, you will get a survey. It will also go out to in an email to people who might have had to leave early. Well, not early because we're going on a little bit, but that's okay. This was a very fascinating panel. I could continue to talk to you folks for another couple of hours. Please do take some time to fill out that survey, because it does help to inform our InFocus program. And with that, I wish you all a very good night.